The crack of leather against flesh echoed through the central courtyard of Volantis like a thunderclap. Veratis felt the whip tear across her back before she heard it. White-hot agony ripped through her body, and she collapsed forward onto the cold flagstones, her bound wrists scraping against the iron post they had chained her to. Blood seeped through the thin fabric of her servant's dress, warm against her skin despite the bitter wind that swept down from the mountains. The crowd that had gathered to witness her punishment stood in terrible silence. Hundreds of wolves, nobles, and commoners alike packed into the courtyard beneath the shadow of the great keep. No one spoke. No one moved to help her. They simply watched with the hollow eyes of those who had learned that mercy was a luxury the Luna of Volantis did not permit. Another crack. Another scream torn from her throat. "Did you think I would not discover your treachery?" The voice belonged to Valoria Sylvain, Luna of Volantis, and mate to the Alpha King himself. She circled Veratis like a predator savoring wounded prey, the silver-handled whip trailing from her elegant fingers. Her gown was the color of fresh blood, her pale hair coiled in elaborate braids that sparkled with rubies. She was beautiful in the way that winter storms are beautiful. Cold, merciless, deadly. Veratis lifted her head, her dark hair matted with sweat and blood. "I have committed no treachery." The whip came down again, and this time, Veratis tasted copper as she bit through her own lip to keep from screaming. "Lies." Valoria's voice was silk wrapped around a blade. "You were seen entering the Eastern Tower 3 nights past, the king's private chambers. Do you deny it?" Veratis's heart seized. She had been there. But not for the reasons Valoria believed. She had gone to deliver a healing draft for the king's battle wounds, nothing more. The head healer had been too drunk to make the climb, and Veratis, as her apprentice, had taken the medicine in her place. But she could not explain the way the king had looked at her when she entered. Could not explain the recognition that had flared in his amber eyes, as if he were seeing someone he had been searching for his entire life. Could not explain the words he had whispered before she fled. "I know you." 3 words that had haunted her every moment since. "I delivered medicine," Veratis gasped. "Nothing more. I swear it on my blood." Valoria laughed, and the sound held no warmth whatsoever. "Your blood means nothing. You are an Omega, the lowest of our kind. And yet you dare to lift your eyes to what belongs to me?" She raised the whip again. "Please." The word scraped from Veratis's throat before she could stop it. "Please, I beg you. Stop." But the Luna's arm was already descending, and then the world exploded. A roar shattered the silence of the courtyard, a sound so primal and furious that wolves throughout the crowd dropped to their knees in instinctive submission. The whip froze mid-swing as every head turned toward the great doors of the keep. The Alpha King stood in the doorway. Corvath Valerin was a man forged for war. His shoulders blocked the light behind him, casting his face in shadow. His dark hair fell past his collar, untamed as the wolf that prowled beneath his skin. He wore no crown, needed none. The power that radiated from him was its own declaration of authority. His amber eyes swept the courtyard and fixed upon the scene before him. The bound Omega, the bloodied whip, his mate's raised arm. Something in his expression shifted. Veratis watched it happen, even through the haze of her pain. Watched the confusion transform into recognition, and recognition into horror, and horror into a rage so vast it seemed to crack the very air around him. "What is this?" His voice was quiet. That was somehow worse than shouting. Valoria lowered the whip, her composure flickering for the first time. "My king, this servant was found trespassing in your private chambers. I am administering appropriate punishment. I did not authorize this punishment. A Luna does not require authorization to discipline servants who forget their place." Corvath descended the steps slowly, each footfall deliberate. The crowd parted before him like water before a blade. He did not look at his mate. His gaze remained fixed on Veratis, on the blood that soaked through her dress, on the trembling of her body as she fought to remain conscious. When he reached her, he knelt, The Luna of Volantis knelt for no one, the Alpha King knelt for no one, and yet, here he was, on his knees in the blood-soaked dirt, his hands reaching for the iron shackles that bound her wrists. "My king." Valoria's voice had gone sharp. "What are you doing?" Corvath did not answer. His fingers found the lock, and with a single wrench of supernatural strength, he tore the shackles apart. The broken chains clattered to the ground. Veratus slumped forward, and his arms caught her before she could fall. The moment his skin touched hers, something ignited between them. A pulse of energy that seemed to ripple outward, that made every wolf in the courtyard lift their head as if scenting something extraordinary. Through her fading vision, Veratus saw the Alpha King's eyes widen with shock. Then he turned to face his mate. "You dare!" The words came out as a growl, barely human. "You dare to raise your hand against her?" "She is a servant," Valoria spat. "An Omega. She is nothing." "She is my—" He stopped himself. But the unfinished word hung in the frozen air, and Veratus saw the exact moment Valoria understood. The Luna's face transformed. Beauty became something twisted, something vicious. Her eyes flickered with a hatred so pure it stole what remained of Veratus's breath. "No," Valoria whispered. "That cannot be." Corvath gathered Veratus against his chest and rose to his feet. She could feel his heart hammering against her cheek, could feel the tremor in his arms as he fought to control his wolf. "Cormac!" he called, and a massive silver-haired warrior stepped forward from the crowd. "Take the Luna to her chambers. She is confined until I determine the appropriate response to this display." "You cannot confine me!" Valoria's voice rose to a shriek. "I am your mate. I am your queen. You cannot choose some worthless Omega over me." Corvath finally looked at her, and in his gaze, Veratus saw something that made her blood run cold. He looked at his mate as if she were a stranger, as if every moment of their union had been a lie he was only now beginning to see. "I said," he repeated softly, "take her to her chambers." Cormac moved forward, and 2 more guards flanked the Luna. She fought them, screaming accusations, screaming threats, screaming promises of vengeance. But they dragged her away, and her voice faded into the depths of the keep. The courtyard remained frozen in stunned silence. Corvath looked down at the woman in his arms. Blood loss was pulling her toward darkness, but she forced her eyes to stay open, forced herself to meet his gaze one final time. "Why?" she managed. The Alpha King's expression cracked. Beneath the rage, beneath the power, she glimpsed something raw and desperate. Something that looked almost like grief. "Because I have been searching for you," he said, "for my entire life. And I did not even know it until 3 nights ago, when you walked into my chamber and everything I thought I knew turned to ash." The words made no sense. None of this made sense. She was an Omega, a nobody, a servant who had survived 19 winters by keeping her head down and her secrets buried. But the mark on her hip, the birthmark she had hidden since childhood, burned with sudden fire. And as unconsciousness finally claimed her, Veratus heard her wolf speak for the first time in her life. "Mate," it whispered. "He is our mate." Then the darkness swallowed her whole. She woke in silk. Veratus's eyes flew open to find herself lying in a bed larger than the entire chamber she had shared with 6 other servants. Cream-colored canopies draped above her. Sunlight streamed through windows fitted with actual glass. The scent of lavender and healing herbs hung in the air. And at the foot of the bed, watching her with amber eyes that glowed faintly in the morning light, sat the Alpha King. Veratus scrambled upright, then gasped as pain lanced across her back. The wounds from the whipping had been treated, she realized. She could feel the tight pull of bandages beneath the soft sleeping gown someone had dressed her in. "Carefully," Corvath said. His voice was rough, as if he had not slept. "The healers did what they could, but you lost a great deal of blood." Veratus clutched the sheets to her chest, her heart racing. "Where am I? Why am I here? What happened after I—" "You are in my chambers." He held up a hand to forestall her panic. I have not touched you. I sat in that chair throughout the night, ensuring no one else could reach you. The implications crashed over her like cold water. The Luna's chambers were somewhere in this keep. The Luna's guards. The Luna's allies. And here was Veratis, an Omega servant, lying in the bed that rightfully belonged to the Queen of Volantis. I cannot be here. She threw back the covers, ignoring the screaming of her wounds. My king, please, you must understand. Whatever you felt in that courtyard, whatever you think you sensed, it cannot be true. I am no one. I am less than no one. The Luna will have me killed for this insult, and she will be justified in doing so. Corvath rose from his chair, and the sheer size of him made her shrink back against the headboard. He must have seen her fear because he stopped several feet away, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. Veratis. The sound of her name in his voice did something strange to her chest. I know what I felt. I know what you are to me. The bond does not lie. There is no bond. Her voice cracked. You are mated to the Luna. The ceremony was performed before the entire kingdom. You bit her. She bit you. The marks are on your skin. Something dark passed across his features. The marks are there, but they have always felt wrong. Empty. I assumed it was simply the nature of political unions, two wolves bound by treaty rather than fate. I did not know there could be anything else. He took a step closer, and against every instinct, Veratis did not retreat. Then you touched me, he continued, and I understood. What I feel for Vyloria is nothing. A pale imitation of a bond. What I felt when my skin met yours was like being struck by lightning, like waking from a sleep I did not know I was trapped in. Veratis shook her head, tears burning her eyes. It does not matter. None of this matters. You cannot dissolve a mating bond. It has never been done in the history of our kind. Then I will be the first. The certainty in his voice terrified her, because she wanted to believe him. Despite everything, despite the danger and the political chaos that would follow, some treacherous part of her soul wanted to reach out and take what he was offering. Her wolf stirred again, that foreign presence that had been silent for 19 years. He speaks truth. He is ours. We are his. Veratis squeezed her eyes shut. My king. Corvath. His voice had softened. Please, when we are alone, call me Corvath. A knock at the door made them both freeze. Cormac's voice came through the wood. My king. House Sylvain demands an audience. Lord Sylvain threatens to withdraw his forces from the northern border if the Luna is not released within the hour. Corvath's expression hardened into something Veratis barely recognized. Gone was the gentle man who had knelt in her blood and torn away her chains. In his place stood the Alpha King, cold and calculating and utterly ruthless. I must deal with this. He moved toward the door, then paused. Remain here. I will post guards I trust. No one will harm you while I am gone. But as the door closed behind him, Veratis knew with terrible certainty that he was wrong. The Luna's reach extended far beyond locked doors and trusted guards. House Sylvain had spent 3 generations building their power, arranging marriages, placing loyalists in every corner of the kingdom. Vyloria would not surrender her crown to an Omega servant. She would burn the entire realm to cinders first. And if Veratis remained, she would be the spark that ignited the flames. She rose from the bed despite her wounds. Her legs trembled, but she forced them to hold her weight. The chamber held a wardrobe, and in the wardrobe she found simple traveling clothes. Not servant's garb, but close enough. They would have to do. As she dressed, her hand brushed against her hip, against the birthmark that had burned during the courtyard confrontation. She looked down at it for the first time in years. Her breath caught. The mark had changed. What had once been an irregular patch of darker skin now formed a distinct shape. A wolf's head, its jaws slightly parted, identical in form to the royal crest of Volantis, the crest that only appeared on those of the ancient bloodline, the crest that marked true mates of the royal house. Veratis pressed her hand over the mark, fighting back a wave of nausea. This was beyond reason. She was an orphan, found as an infant at the gates of the castle with no note, no token, no hint of her origins. She had been raised in the servants' quarters, scrubbing floors and emptying chamber pots. There was no royal blood in her veins, and yet the mark pulsed with warmth beneath her palm, as if disagreeing. She could not think about this now, could not process the implications. All she knew was that if she stayed, war would follow. House Sylvain would rally the noble families against the king, wolves would die by the thousands, and all because fate had made a terrible mistake, binding the Alpha King to a worthless Omega who should never have caught his attention. Veratis found parchment and ink on the writing desk. Her hands shook as she wrote. I cannot be the cause of your kingdom's destruction. Please do not search for me. Forget that I exist. The bond will fade with distance and time. Find peace with your Luna. It is the only way. She did not sign the note. He would know who it was from. The window opened onto a narrow ledge that overlooked the servants' garden 3 stories below. Veratis had climbed these walls as a child, sneaking out to watch the stars when sleep would not come. Her body remembered the route even as her wounds screamed in protest. By the time the king returned to his empty chambers, Veratis was already beyond the city walls, and she did not see the way he fell to his knees when he found her letter. Did not hear the howl that erupted from his throat, a sound of such anguish that wolves throughout the castle dropped where they stood, clutching their chests as their king's pain resonated through every connection he held. Did not see Cormac burst through the door to find his king weeping over a scrap of parchment, clutching it as though it were the only thing keeping him tethered to sanity. Find her, Corvath rasped. I do not care what it costs. I do not care who stands in the way. Find her and bring her home. But by the time his wolves took up the hunt, Veratis had vanished into the wilderness like smoke on the wind. 5 months had passed since Veratis fled Volantis. 5 months of running, of hiding, of rebuilding herself from the broken pieces the Luna's whip had left behind. She had traveled south through the mountains, then east across the salt flats, then north again through forests so ancient that even wolves feared to tread their paths. She had changed her name 4 times, her story with each new village she passed through. Now she was simply Wren, a young widow, she told anyone who asked. Her husband had died in a border skirmish, leaving her with nothing but grief and the child growing in her belly. She had come to Bracken Hollow seeking peace and a fresh start. The villagers had accepted her story without question. Bracken Hollow was that kind of place. A small community of farmers and craftsmen tucked into a valley so remote that news from the capital took weeks to arrive. The people here cared little for politics or noble houses. They cared about the harvest, about the winter stores, about whether the healer woman could cure their children's fevers and their livestock's ailments. Veradis, who had trained under the castle's head healer for 7 years, could do all of that and more. She had claimed the abandoned cottage at the forest's edge, the one the previous healer had occupied before old age claimed her. It was small and drafty and desperately in need of repairs, but it was hers, the first thing she had ever truly owned. Now, as autumn surrendered to the first whispers of winter, Veratis stood at her work table grinding dried feverfew into powder. Her back still ached from the scars that would never fully heal. Her feet were swollen from the weight she carried, but her hands remained steady as she worked. The baby kicked, and she paused to press her palm against the swell of her belly. The child had quickened 2 months ago, the first fluttering movements that confirmed what she had suspected since her 2nd week of flight. She was pregnant. Beyond all explanation, pregnant. She had not lain with any man, had barely spoken to any man who was not a patient or a merchant. And yet life grew within her, strong and insistent and utterly undeniable. Her wolf, that presence which had awakened in the courtyard of Volantis, had offered the only explanation that made sense. The bond. When he touched us, when his skin met ours, the mating connection began to form. It was enough. Enough for what should have defied nature. enough to create a child from a single moment of contact, from the brush of the Alpha King's hands as he freed her from her chains. Veratus had wept for 3 days when she realized the truth. Now she simply tried not to think about it. Tried not to imagine Corvath's face if he ever learned that his heir grew in the belly of a runaway Omega. Tried not to wonder if the child would have his amber eyes or her dark hair. Tried not to feel the way the birthmark on her hip pulsed with warmth every time her thoughts drifted toward him. Because the mark had not faded. She had expected it to dim with distance, to eventually disappear entirely as the incomplete bond dissolved. That was how it worked with rejected mates, with bonds that never fully formed. The connection withered like a vine cut from its root. But her mark only grew stronger. Some nights it burned so fiercely that she could not sleep, could only pace her small cottage and press cold cloths against her hip, and wonder if he felt the same fire across the hundreds of miles that separated them. A knock at the door made her jump. Veratus set down her mortar and pestle, wiping her hands on her apron. Visitors were not uncommon, but they usually came during daylight hours. The sun had set an hour ago, painting the valley in shades of purple and black. She opened the door to find young Tomas, the miller's son, breathless and wide-eyed on her threshold. Mistress Wren. He was 12 years old and prone to dramatics, but the fear on his face seemed genuine. Traders have come to the village. They bring news from the capital. Veratus's heart clenched. What news? The Alpha King has gone mad. Thomas practically vibrated with the importance of his message. They say he has abandoned his Luna entirely, refuses to see her, refuses to touch her. They say he wanders the castle at night howling like a wild beast. They say he has sent wolves to every corner of the kingdom searching for a woman, though no one knows who she is or what she has done. The world tilted beneath Veratus's feet. The traders say crops are failing in the eastern provinces. Tomas continued breathlessly. They say the king's madness has spread through his connection to his people, making wolves restless and aggressive. They say he has offered a fortune in gold for any information about this mysterious woman. How much? Veratus's voice sounded distant to her own ears. 15,000 pieces? Tomas's eyes were round as moons. Can you imagine? 15,000 gold for a single woman. She must have done something terrible. 15,000. More than most villages earned in a decade. Enough to make anyone a target. Enough to make friends into betrayers and neighbors into hunters. Thank you for the news, Tomas. Veratus forced her voice to remain steady. Tell your father I will have his cough remedy ready by morning. After the boy had gone, she closed the door and leaned against it, her legs threatening to give way. He was searching for her. 5 months, and he had not stopped. 5 months, and the mad king of Volantis was still tearing his realm apart trying to find the Omega who had run from him. Her wolf stirred with something that felt dangerously like hope. He did not forget. He did not give up. Go to him. I cannot. Veratus whispered the words aloud, pressing both hands to her belly. Do you not understand? If I return, the Luna will have me killed. If I return, the kingdom will fall into civil war. If I return, she could not finish the thought. Because if she returned, she would have to tell him about the child. And then, nothing would stop him from claiming them both. Consequences be damned. He would burn his kingdom to the ground before letting her slip away again. Movement outside the window caught her attention. Veratus froze, her breath stopping in her chest. A shape stood at the tree line. Large, 4-legged. Gray fur silvered by moonlight. A wolf. As she watched, another emerged from the shadows. Then another. 5 wolves in total, their eyes reflecting the candlelight from her window with an intelligence that was anything but animal. The birthmark on her hip exploded with heat. Veratus gasped, doubling over as sensation radiated through her body. Not pain, she realized. Something else. Recognition. Connection. The incomplete bond screaming that something had changed, that the distance between her and her mate had suddenly, drastically decreased. Her baby kicked violently, movements coming from 2 different places at once. 2 different places. Twins. She was carrying twins. The realization hit her like a physical blow, and she staggered against the wall, one hand flying to her belly as the other gripped the window frame for support. Among those who carried ancient bloodlines, pregnancies often progressed faster than normal, the supernatural nature of the children accelerating their development. But twins had not occurred in any royal line for generations. Through the wavy glass, she watched the wolves begin to move, not toward her cottage, but around it, circling, surrounding, cutting off any avenue of escape. They had found her. After 5 months of running, after crossing half the kingdom and changing her name 4 times and building a new life from nothing, they had finally found her. And now there was nowhere left to run. The largest wolf lifted its head and howled, a sound that echoed through the valley and sent birds scattering from the trees. It was not an attack cry. It was a signal. Calling others. Calling him. Veratis pressed her forehead against the cold glass, tears streaming down her cheeks. Along the tether that still connected them, through the mark that burned like a brand on her hip, she felt an answering pulse of emotion. Relief. Desperation. Hope so fierce it bordered on madness. And love. Love so vast and overwhelming that it stole her breath, that made her knees buckle, that shattered every wall she had built around her heart. I found you. The words seemed to whisper directly into her mind, carried on the wind of their incomplete bond. Finally. I found you. The babies kicked again, hard enough to make her gasp. And somewhere in the darkness beyond her cottage, a wolf the color of midnight began to run. The knock came at midnight. Veratis had not moved from the window in hours. She had watched the wolves circle her cottage, had felt the birthmark on her hip pulse with increasing intensity, had sensed him drawing closer with every passing minute. Now her legs ached, and her back screamed, and her babies had finally stilled, as if they too were holding their breath. The knock came again, firm but not violent. Mistress Wren. A male voice, deep and weathered. I am Cormac, first beta to the Alpha King. I mean you no harm. Please open the door. Cormac. She remembered the name. The silver-haired warrior who had dragged the screaming Luna from the courtyard. The one Corvath had trusted to guard his mate while he dealt with House Sylvain's threats. Veratis's hand trembled as she reached for the door latch. She could refuse to answer. Could barricade herself inside and pray they would leave. But wolves did not abandon their quarry, and the Alpha King's first beta would simply break down the door if she forced his hand. Better to face this with what dignity she had left. She opened the door. Cormac stood on her threshold, his massive frame blocking out the moonlight. He looked older than she remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper, his silver hair longer and wilder. Behind him, 2 younger wolves waited with careful alertness. But it was Cormac's expression that made her breath catch. He looked at her with something that resembled reverence. My lady. He dropped to one knee on her doorstep, his head bowed. We have been searching for you for 5 months. The king has nearly destroyed himself in the effort. I am not your lady. Veratis's voice came out stronger than she expected. I am an Omega, a servant, a nobody who should never have caught his attention. Cormac lifted his head, and his amber eyes held steady on hers. You are his true mate. The bond does not lie, and the bond has nearly driven him to madness in your absence. Then the bond has made a mistake. The bond never makes mistakes. Cormac rose to his feet. May I enter? There is much you need to understand, and the night is not safe for conversation. Veratis wanted to refuse, but her legs were shaking. Her mark was burning, and somewhere in the darkness beyond her cottage, she could feel Corvath drawing ever closer. She stepped aside. Cormac entered alone, leaving his wolves to guard the door. He looked around her modest cottage, taking in the drying herbs, the worn furniture, the narrow bed where she had spent countless nights pressing her hand to her belly and wondering what kind of life she could offer children born from a bond that should never have existed. He did not abandon you. Cormac's voice was quiet. The day you fled, He came to his chambers to tell you that he had dissolved his union with the Luna. He had done what had never been done. He had severed the false connection through sheer force of will, through the power of what he felt for you. Veratis's knees buckled. She caught herself on the back of a chair, her mind reeling. That defies everything we know. A mating bond cannot be broken. It can, when it was never true to begin with. Cormac's jaw tightened. The king's bond with Valoria was arranged when they were children. Forced through ceremony and ritual, not formed through genuine connection. It held because neither of them knew what a real bond felt like. But the moment he touched you, the moment he felt what a true mate bond could be, the false one began to crumble. Veratis pressed her hand to her hip, where the mark still burned. If he broke the bond, why is the Luna still alive? Why is House Sylvain still threatening war? Because Valoria escaped. Darkness crept into Cormac's voice. The night you fled, she slipped past her guards with help from loyalists within the castle. She returned to her family's stronghold in the north. For 5 months, she has been rallying support, spreading lies about the king's madness, positioning herself as the rightful queen displaced by an Omega's witchcraft. Witchcraft. The word sent ice through Veratis's veins. Among wolf-kind, accusations of witchcraft were death sentences. If the Luna had convinced the noble houses that Veratis had used dark magic to enchant their king. There is more. Cormac withdrew a folded letter from his coat. This was intercepted 3 days ago by our scouts in the northern pass. Veratis took the paper with numb fingers. The seal was broken, but she could see the serpent crest of House Sylvain pressed into the dark wax. The message inside was brief. The Omega has been located in the Eastern Valley. The child she carries must not be allowed to live. Eliminate the threat before the next moon rises. Long live Queen Valoria. Child. They knew she was pregnant. Veratis's vision blurred as terror crashed through her. She had been so careful, had never spoken of her pregnancy to anyone who might carry tales, had attributed her growing belly to nothing more than a widow's grief and poor appetite. But the Luna had spies everywhere, and now assassins were coming for her child. How long? She heard herself ask. Cormac's expression was grim. We intercepted the message 3 days past. The assassins were dispatched at least a week before that. My lady, they could already be. A howl split the night air. Close. Too close. Cormac was moving before the sound faded, his body shifting between one heartbeat and the next. Where the beta had stood, a massive silver wolf now crouched, hackles raised, teeth bared toward the door. Through the window, Veratis saw the king's wolves scatter. Not in retreat, but in response to a threat. Dark shapes were pouring from the tree line, more wolves than she could count, their eyes gleaming with murderous intent. The assassins had arrived, and they had brought an army. The first wolf crashed through Veratis's window in an explosion of glass and fury. Cormac intercepted it mid-leap, his jaws closing around its throat with a sickening crunch. Blood sprayed across the cottage walls as the silver beta flung the body aside, already turning to meet the next attacker. Veratis scrambled backward, her hands flying to her belly as chaos erupted around her. Through the shattered window, she could see the king's wolves fighting desperately against the assassin pack. They were outnumbered 3-1, and more dark shapes kept emerging from the forest. Another wolf burst through the door, splinters exploding inward. Cormac lunged to intercept, but a third attacker came through the window behind him, teeth snapping at his hindquarters. He whirled to face the new threat, leaving the first wolf free to advance on Veratis. She pressed herself against the wall, her heart slamming against her ribs. The wolf stalked toward her with deliberate menace, saliva dripping from its jaws. Its eyes held no animal hunger, only cold, calculating intelligence. This was no wild beast. This was an executioner. The child she carries must not be allowed to live. The wolf crouched to spring, and something inside Veratis snapped. She had spent her entire life being small, being invisible, being the Omega who kept her head down and her secrets buried. She had fled from the only man who had ever truly seen her because she believed she was not worthy of his love. But she was not alone anymore. Two lives grew within her, two innocent souls who had done nothing to deserve the death that stalked toward them. And she would be damned to the darkest hell before she let anyone harm her children. The power rose without conscious thought. It erupted from somewhere deep within her chest, a golden light that poured from her hands like liquid fire. The assassin wolf yelped as the radiance struck it, its dark fur smoking and sizzling as it scrambled backward. Veratis stared at her own hands in shock. They glowed like captured sunlight, tendrils of golden energy writhing around her fingers. She had always possessed a small gift for healing, a minor talent that had made her useful to the castle's head healer. But this was something else entirely. This was ancient power. The royal bloodline. Her wolf's voice echoed in her mind. We carry more than we knew. The children have awakened what was always dormant within us. The assassin wolf had recovered from its shock. It circled her now, more cautious than before, but no less determined. Two more wolves squeezed through the shattered window to flank it. Cormac was still fighting behind her, holding off multiple attackers with desperate fury. She could hear his labored breathing, could smell his blood on the air. He was losing. Veratis raised her glowing hands. Stay back. Her voice carried harmonics she had never heard before, resonances that seemed to vibrate in the very air. I will not warn you again. The lead wolf shifted. Bones cracked and reformed as the assassin took human shape. A woman with close-cropped dark hair and a face carved from cruelty. She stood naked in the wreckage of the cottage, utterly unconcerned with her vulnerability. The Luna sends her regards, Omega. Her voice was cold as northern ice. She wants you to know that your child will die screaming, and the king will never even know it existed. Rage erupted through Veratis like wildfire. She thrust her hands forward, and golden light blazed from her palms with devastating force. The assassin was thrown backward through the cottage wall, leaving a gaping hole in the timber. The two flanking wolves yelped and scattered, their fur smoking. But the effort cost her. Veratis staggered, her vision swimming. The power had come from somewhere, and that somewhere was her own life force. She could feel her strength draining, could feel the golden light flickering and dimming as exhaustion crashed through her body. The babies kicked frantically, as if trying to give her strength. It was not enough. More wolves were coming. She could see them through the hole in her wall, dark shapes converging on the cottage from all directions. Cormac had fallen, his silver fur matted with blood, still fighting but barely able to stand. The female assassin rose from the wreckage, shaking splinters from her now shifted wolf form. One side of her body was badly burned, the fur charred away to reveal raw flesh beneath. But she was still alive. And she was furious. She shifted back to human, her damaged skin glistening in the moonlight. You will suffer for that, Omega. I was going to make it quick. A mercy, really. But now I think I will take my time. Veratis tried to raise her hands again, tried to summon the golden light. But her power had guttered out like a candle in a storm. She had nothing left. The assassin shifted back to wolf form and lunged. Veratis closed her eyes and wrapped her arms around her belly, shielding her children with the only thing she had left. Her own body. The impact never came. Instead, a roar shattered the night. A sound so vast, so primal, so filled with devastating rage that the very earth seemed to tremble beneath its force. Veratis's eyes flew open. A wolf the color of midnight stood between her and the assassin. It was enormous, larger than any wolf she had ever seen, its shoulders level with her chest. Its fur seemed to absorb the moonlight, creating a void of shadow in the shape of a beast, and its eyes blazed with golden fire. The assassin wolf had frozen mid-lunge, its body suspended in a moment of pure terror. It tried to twist away, tried to flee, but it was far too slow. The midnight wolf moved like darkness given form. Its jaws closed around the assassin's throat, and with a single savage wrench, it tore her head from her body. The remaining assassins did not need to see more. They scattered in all directions, abandoning their mission, abandoning their packmates, fleeing into the night with howls of pure terror. The midnight wolf did not pursue. It stood in the wreckage of Veratus's cottage, blood dripping from its muzzle, its massive body heaving with each breath. Then it turned to face her. And along the mate connection that had never stopped burning, Veratus felt his presence crash into her like a tidal wave. Mate. His voice in her mind was raw, broken, and desperate. My mate. The wolf began to shift. The transformation took only seconds, but Veratus felt every moment stretch into eternity. The massive wolf dissolved into shadow and light, bones cracking and reshaping, fur receding into bronzed skin. When it was done, a man knelt in the blood-soaked ruins of her cottage. Corvath looked like a ghost of the king she remembered. His dark hair had grown past his shoulders, tangled and wild. His face was gaunt, the sharp planes of his cheekbones cutting shadows beneath hollow eyes. The powerful body she remembered had grown leaner, harder, as if he had been burning himself from the inside out for months. But his eyes were the same. Amber fire that blazed with an intensity that stole her breath. He did not speak, did not move, simply knelt there, staring at her as if she might dissolve into mist if he blinked. His gaze dropped to her belly, to the unmistakable swell of pregnancy that her thin sleeping gown did nothing to hide. A sound escaped his throat. Not quite a word. Something more primal. Veratus. Her name emerged as a broken whisper. You are with child. Children. The word slipped out before she could stop it. Twins. Corvath's entire body shuddered. His hands reached toward her belly, trembling violently, then stopped inches away as if he did not dare to touch her. Mine? The question held no accusation, only desperate, agonized hope. Yours. Veratus felt tears burning her eyes. The night you freed me from the chains, when your skin touched mine, the bond was enough. A sob tore from the Alpha King's chest. He doubled over, pressing his forehead to the floor at her feet, his shoulders heaving with the force of his grief. 5 months. His voice was muffled against the blood-stained wood. 5 months I have searched for you. 5 months I have felt you through our connection, felt our bond burning, and I thought I was going mad. I thought my wolf was driving me into delusion. You should not have searched. Veratus heard the words emerge from her own mouth, cold and defensive. The walls she had built around her heart were crumbling, and she was terrified of what would remain when they fell. I left you a letter. I told you to forget me. I told you to make peace with your Luna. Corvath's head snapped up. The grief in his eyes transformed into something fierce, something almost angry. Make peace with her. He rose to his feet, and despite his gaunt frame, he still towered over her. Make peace with the woman who whipped you bloody in front of my entire court? Make peace with the creature who smiled while she tore the flesh from your back? She is your mate. She was never my mate. The words came out as a snarl. She was a political arrangement, a treaty sealed in ritual that I never wanted. I endured her presence because I believed it was my duty, because I thought true mate bonds were fairy tales told to children. He stepped closer, and Veratus pressed herself against the wall. Then you walked into my chamber, he continued, his voice dropping to something raw and intimate. You walked in, and my wolf woke up. For the first time in my entire life, he woke up. He looked at you and said one word. What word? Veratus whispered. Home. Corvath's eyes glistened. He said home. A sob escaped her throat. All the pain of the past 5 months came flooding back. The terror of the whipping. The agony of her flight. The loneliness of her exile. The desperate, futile hope she had tried to smother every single night. I could not stay. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. The Luna would have killed me. House Sylvain would have destroyed you. I was trying to protect you. I was trying to save your kingdom. My kingdom means nothing without you. Do not say that. It is the truth. Corvath reached for her face, and this time his trembling hands made contact. His palms cupped her cheeks, his thumbs brushing away her tears. Veratus, I have spent 5 months tearing apart everything I built to find you. I have neglected my duties, abandoned my counsel, and driven my wolves to exhaustion. Half the noble houses have declared me unfit to rule. Then why? She demanded. Why would you destroy yourself for an Omega you barely know? Because I love you. The words struck her like a physical blow. I love you, he repeated, his voice cracking. I loved you from the moment I saw you. I loved you when you brought medicine to my chamber and looked at me like I was just a man. I loved you when you stood in that courtyard, beaten and bloody, and still refused to beg for mercy you did not deserve. His forehead pressed against hers. I loved you when you ran from me. I loved you when I woke to find your letter. I loved you through every empty day and every endless night of searching. And I love you now, standing in the ruins of a cottage with my children growing in your belly and assassins dead at my feet. Veratus's hands had somehow found their way to his chest. She could feel his heart hammering beneath her palms, a wild rhythm that matched her own. I left because I love you too, she confessed, the words tearing free from the deepest part of her soul. I left because I could not bear to be the reason your kingdom fell. I left because I was terrified that what you felt was not real, that the bond would fade, that you would wake one day and see me for what I truly am. And what is that? Nobody. The word emerged as a broken whisper. A servant, an orphan, an Omega with no name and no lineage and nothing to offer a king. Corvath's grip on her face tightened. You are everything, he said fiercely. You are my mate, the mother of my children, the woman who carries the mark of the royal bloodline on her hip, though you do not yet understand what that means. Veratus's breath caught. What does it mean? It means you were never nobody. His eyes bored into hers. It means we need to discover who you truly are, but first, we need to survive. A groan from behind them made them both turn. Cormac had shifted back to human form, his body covered in wounds that were already beginning to heal. 2 of the king's wolves had fallen in the battle and would not rise again. My king, Cormac's voice was strained. The assassins who fled will report back to House Sylvain. They know where she is. They know about the children. More will come. Corvath's arm wrapped around Veratus's waist, pulling her against his side with protective ferocity. Then we go to Volantis, he said. Tonight, we face whatever comes together. Veratus looked up at him, at the hollow-eyed king who had torn his realm apart to find her, who had just slaughtered assassins with his bare teeth to protect her. Together? She asked softly. Corvath pressed a kiss to her forehead, and through their bond, she felt his answer resonate in her very soul. Always, my heart. From this moment until my last breath, together. Outside, wolves began to howl, a gathering cry, a call to arms, and in the distance, too far to see but close enough to feel, darkness was already marshalling its forces for the war to come. The journey to Volantis should have taken 4 days. Corvath's wolves made it in 2. They traveled through the night and into the dawn, pausing only when Veratus's body demanded rest. She rode before the king on his massive black stallion, his arm wrapped securely around her waist, his chest warm against her back. The babies seemed to sense their father's presence, their movements settling into peaceful stillness for the first time in months. As the miles fell away beneath thundering hooves, Corvath told her everything. He told her about the moment he found her letter, how his legs had given out, how he had clutched that scrap of parchment and howled until his throat bled. He told her about the days that followed, the sleepless nights, the endless councils where nobles demanded he forget his obsession and return to his Luna, the way his wolf had clawed at his sanity, desperate to find its mate. I could feel you, He murmured against her hair. Through our connection, every day I felt a pulse of warmth, and I knew you were alive. Some nights, when exhaustion finally took me, I dreamed of you. I spoke to you in those dreams. I told you I was coming. Veratis's breath caught. I heard you. Corvath stiffened behind her. What? The dreams. She turned her head to meet his eyes. I thought I was imagining them. You came to my cottage. You stood beside my bed. You told me you loved me, that you would find me, and that nothing would keep us apart. Those were not imagination. His voice was hoarse. My wolf. When my body slept, he reached for you through our link. I thought it was only desperation manifesting as fantasy. It was real. Veratis pressed her hand over his where it rested on her belly. All of it was real. Corvath made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. His arm tightened around her, and she felt the tremor that ran through his body. We were never truly apart, he whispered, even across hundreds of miles. Even when you believed I had betrayed you, the bond held. They stopped at midday beside a frozen stream, the horses needing water and Veritas needing relief from the saddle. Cormac and the remaining wolves established a perimeter, while the king helped Veritas dismount with careful hands. She walked to the stream's edge, stretching her aching back. The reflection that stared up at her from the ice-crusted water was almost unrecognizable. Hollow cheeks, shadowed eyes, the face of a woman who had spent 5 months running from everything she wanted. Corvath appeared beside her, his reflection joining hers. Tell me, he said quietly. Tell me what these months have been for you. I need to know. So she told him. She told him about the terror of her flight, traveling through snowstorms with wounds still bleeding beneath her cloak, about the villages that turned her away, the nights spent shivering in barns and abandoned shelters, about arriving in Bracken Hollow with nothing but the clothes on her back and a child quickening in her womb. She told him about discovering she was pregnant, the shock, the fear, the desperate joy that had pierced through her grief like sunlight through storm clouds. I talked to them every night, she confessed. I pressed my hands to my belly and told them about their father. I told them you were brave and strong and kind. I told them the bond had made a mistake, matching you with someone like me, but that the children born from it would be extraordinary. Corvath's hand found hers, his fingers interlacing with her own. The bond made no mistake. His voice was fierce. You are extraordinary. You survived the Luna's cruelty, fled across a kingdom, built a new life, and protected our children against assassins. You summoned power that should have been beyond reach, power that belongs to the ancient bloodline. I do not understand that power. Veratis looked down at her free hand, remembering the golden light that had erupted from her palms. I have always had a small gift for healing, but what happened in the cottage was something else entirely. The mark on your hip, Corvath said. May I see it? Veratis hesitated, then nodded. She shifted her traveling cloak aside, lifting the edge of her tunic to expose the birthmark on her left hip. Corvath inhaled sharply. The mark had changed again. What had been a wolf's head now showed additional details. A crown above the wolf's brow, stars scattered around its form, and wrapped around the entire design, a pattern of interlocking circles that seemed to pulse with faint golden light. The Selenther crest, Corvath breathed, the bloodline that founded Volantis 1,000 years ago. They were said to carry the light of the moon in their veins. That defies reason. Veratis's voice shook. The Selenther line died out 3 centuries past. Perhaps not entirely. Corvath's eyes met hers. You were found at the castle gates as an infant. No note, no token. But someone placed you there deliberately, within reach of the royal house. The implications crashed through her mind. If she carried Selenther blood, she was not merely a suitable mate for the king. She was royalty in her own right. Her children would carry 2 ancient bloodlines, a concentration of power not seen in living memory. And the Luna, who had whipped her like a common criminal, would have every reason to want her dead. We need to reach Volantis, Veratus said. Whatever I am, whatever the truth of my blood, it changes nothing if Vyloria kills me first. Corvath cupped her face in his hands. I will never let that happen. He kissed her. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning. But when Veratus's hands curled into the fabric of his tunic, when she pulled him closer with desperate need, something ignited between them. Their bond roared to life. Veratus gasped against his mouth as sensation flooded through her. Not just physical, but emotional, spiritual. She felt his love crash into her like a wave, felt his fear for her safety, felt the 5 months of anguish he had endured in her absence, and he felt her. Every lonely night, every moment of doubt, every time she had pressed her hand to her hip and longed for him despite believing he had cast her aside. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Veratus saw tears streaming down the king's face. I will never leave you again, she promised. Whatever comes, whatever we must face. I am yours, Corvath. Completely and forever. He pressed his forehead to hers. And I am yours. My heart, my soul, my crown. All of it belongs to you. A howl rose from the perimeter. Cormac's signal. They needed to move. But as Corvath lifted her back onto the horse, as his arms wrapped around her with fierce protection, Veratus felt something she had not experienced in 5 months. Hope. They rode through the night, and when dawn broke over the mountains of Volantis, the capital city appeared before them. Something was wrong. Smoke rose from the harbor district. The banner flying above the castle gates was not the midnight wolf of House Valerine. It was the silver serpent of House Sylvain. Corvath's arm turned to iron around her waist. No, Cormac breathed from beside them. They would not dare. But they had dared. And as a scout came racing toward them with terror in his eyes, Veratus felt her fragile hope begin to crack. The Luna had made her move, and everything they loved hung in the balance. The scout's name was Brennick, and his report turned Corvath's blood to ice. House Sylvain struck 2 nights past, the young wolf gasped, his horse lathered with sweat. They had allies within the guard. Lord Sylvain has declared himself regent, claiming you abandoned your throne and your sanity. Corvath's grip on Veratus tightened. And Valoria? The Luna has been crowned queen. Brennick's voice cracked. She addressed the court yesterday. She said you had been corrupted by dark magic, that an Omega witch had stolen your will. She said she was forced to take the throne to save the kingdom from your madness. Veratus felt the world tilt beneath her. She had fled to protect Corvath's kingdom. Instead, her absence had given the Luna exactly what she needed to seize power. There is more, Brennick continued. They have taken hostages, everyone who remained loyal to you, everyone who refused to bend the knee. They are to be executed at sunset as traitors to the crown. How many? Cormac demanded. 43. The scout's eyes glistened. Including the old healer who trained the Omega, the one who sent her to deliver medicine to your chambers that night. Meridia. The name struck Veratus like a blade between the ribs. Meridia, who had taught her everything about herbs and healing, who had been too drunk that night to make the climb herself, sending Veratus in her place, who had unknowingly set in motion the chain of events that had brought them all to this moment. We have to save them, Veratus said. Corvath looked down at her, his jaw tight. Veratus, you cannot enter that city. If Valoria captures you, she will execute you on sight. And if we do nothing, 43 innocent people die because they were loyal to you, because they showed kindness to me. She met his gaze without flinching. I will not hide while others pay the price for my existence. I cannot. For a long moment, the Alpha King stared at her. Then something shifted in his expression. Pride. Recognition. And beneath it all, a love so fierce it stole her breath. My queen, he murmured. Even now you think of others before yourself. He turned to address the wolves assembled behind them. The Sylvains believe they have won. They believe their treachery has secured them the throne. They believe their false queen sits unchallenged in a stolen castle. His eyes blazed with golden fire. They are wrong. The wolves stirred, a ripple of anticipation running through their ranks. Today, we take back what is ours. Today, we show the traitors what happens to those who threaten our king, our true queen, and the heirs she carries. A howl rose from the assembled wolves, dozens of voices joining in a chorus of fury and determination. They approached the city through the old mining tunnels, passages that had been sealed for decades, but which Cormac knew from his youth. The tunnels emerged within the castle walls, in the abandoned cellars beneath the great keep. From there, they moved like shadows through servant corridors and forgotten passageways. The castle was crawling with Sylvain soldiers, but they were arrogant in their victory, paying little attention to the depths beneath their feet. They reached the great hall just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Through a crack in the servant's door, Veratis saw a scene that made her blood run cold. 43 hostages knelt in a line before the raised dais, their hands bound behind their backs. Armed Sylvain soldiers stood behind them with blades drawn, prepared to carry out the executions, and on the throne that should have belonged to Corvath sat Vyloria Sylvain. She was dressed in black and silver, the colors of the house she had married into and then betrayed. A crown of dark iron sat upon her pale hair, and her eyes, cold as frozen lakes, surveyed the hostages before her with contempt. Beside her stood Lord Aldrich Sylvain, her father, his silver beard immaculately groomed despite the chaos he had wrought. "The traitors will be dealt with according to tradition," Vyloria announced, her voice carrying across the hushed hall. Beginning with the old healer who served as the Omega's mentor. 2 soldiers dragged Meridia forward. The old woman's face was bruised, her gray hair tangled and matted, but her eyes remained defiant as they forced her to her knees before the throne. "Any final words, witch?" Vyloria asked. Meridia lifted her chin. "I would do it again. Every moment of kindness I showed that girl, I would do it again. She has more honor in her smallest finger than you possess in your entire bloodline." Vyloria's hand moved in a sharp gesture. The executioner stepped forward, raising his blade, and Veratis moved. She was through the servant's door before Corvath could stop her, her pregnant body crossing the marble floor with speed that should have been beyond her. "Stop." Her voice echoed through the great hall. "It is me you want. Take me instead." Every head in the chamber turned. Vyloria's eyes went wide, then narrow, then bright with vicious triumph. "The Omega returns." The Luna rose from her stolen throne, descending the dais steps with predatory grace. "How convenient. I had planned to hunt you down after dealing with these traitors, but you have saved me the trouble. Release the hostages." Veratis stood her ground despite the terror coursing through her veins. "Let them go, and I will surrender myself to your judgment." "Veratis, no!" Corvath burst through the servant's door, his wolves flowing into the hall behind him. But Sylvain soldiers were already converging, blades drawn. "Ah, the Mad King arrives to watch his whore die." Vyloria smiled. "How romantic." Lord Sylvain stepped forward, his hand raised to halt his soldiers' advance. "You are outnumbered, Corvath. My forces hold the castle, the city, and the loyalty of half the noble houses. Surrender now, and I will grant you a quick death." "You will grant me nothing." Corvath's voice was pure menace. "You have committed treason against your rightful king. The punishment is death." "Treason?" Vyloria laughed. "You abandoned your throne to chase an Omega across 3 kingdoms. You broke your sacred bond to your rightful mate. You brought chaos and suffering to the realm with your obsession." She gestured toward Veratis's swollen belly. "And now you dare to present your bastard offspring as legitimate heirs?" "They are legitimate." Corvath's eyes blazed gold. "Veratis is my true mate. The bond recognized her before I knew her name. Your claim was always false, built on ceremony without substance. Then let the gods decide. Vyloria drew a blade from her belt, a slender sword that gleamed with dark silver. Trial by combat. You against me. The winner takes the throne and decides the fate of the Omega. You cannot be serious. Cormac stepped forward. A Luna challenging an Alpha King to single combat? The old laws permit it. Lord Sylvain's smile was cold. When the succession is in dispute, any claimant may issue challenge. My daughter has every right. Corvath's jaw clenched. Veratus saw the conflict in his eyes, the unwillingness to harm a woman, even one who had tortured his mate and stolen his crown. And she saw Valoria's smile widen as she recognized his hesitation. The Luna was counting on his mercy, was planning to exploit it, because the blade in her hand was not ordinary steel. The dark shimmer on its edge was unmistakable. Wolfsbane. The same poison that could suppress a wolf's abilities could sever the connection between man and beast. Valoria was not planning to fight fairly. She was planning to murder him with a poisoned blade while he held back out of misplaced honor. Veratus's wolf surged within her. No. The word erupted from her throat with harmonic force. I will stand in his place. Silence crashed through the hall. Valoria turned to face her, disbelief flickering across her beautiful features. You? An Omega? Challenging me? The old laws do not specify rank. Veratus stepped forward, her hands moving to rest on her swollen belly. Any claimant may issue challenge. I claim the throne by right of true mate bond, and I challenge you for it. You are pregnant, Valoria hissed. You can barely stand without swaying. Then it should be an easy victory for you. Veratus's voice held steady despite her pounding heart. Unless you are afraid. The Luna's eyes narrowed to slits of ice. Very well, Omega. Let us finish what began in the courtyard 5 months ago. She raised her poisoned blade. This time, there will be no king to save you. Corvath lunged forward, but Cormac and 2 other wolves caught him, holding him back. She has invoked the old laws, Cormac said urgently. If you interfere, the challenge is forfeit. She knows what she is doing. She is pregnant, Corvath snarled. She cannot fight. She will die. But Veratus was no longer listening. She faced her enemy across the blood-stained marble of the Great Hall, her hands still pressed to the children growing within her. The birthmark on her hip burned with fierce intensity. The power she had discovered in her cottage stirred in her chest. Valoria charged, and Veratus let her wolf rise. The transformation should have been beyond possibility. Pregnant wolves did not shift. The risk to the unborn children was too great. The physical strain too severe. Every healer in the kingdom would have forbidden it, but Veratus's wolf would not be denied. It erupted from within her with savage force, shattering through the barriers she had unconsciously maintained for 19 years. Golden light blazed from her skin as bones cracked and reformed, as her body twisted and changed in the space between heartbeats. Valoria's charge faltered, her poisoned blade slicing through empty air where Veratus had stood. Where a pregnant woman had been, a wolf now crouched. She was not large like Corvath's midnight form, but she was luminous. Her fur shone like captured moonlight, pure white threaded with veins of gold that pulsed with inner fire. Her eyes blazed with amber light that seemed to illuminate the entire hall. And wrapped around her transformed belly, where 2 lives still grew despite the shift, a web of golden energy formed a protective cocoon, the Selenther blood, the ancient magic. It had not merely awoken. It had transformed. Valoria stumbled backward, her face twisting with shock and rage. What are you? Veratus did not answer with words. She answered with her teeth. She lunged. The Luna barely dodged in time, her supernatural reflexes saving her from the snapping jaws that would have torn out her throat. She shifted mid-leap, her own wolf form emerging in a flash of silver and white. Larger than Veratus, trained for combat, deadly in ways that no Omega should have been able to match. But Valoria had spent her life fighting other wolves. Wolves who followed rules. Wolves who could be predicted. Veratus had spent her life surviving. They clashed in the center of the great hall, a storm of fur and fangs and savage fury. The Solvain soldiers fell back, even they unwilling to interfere in a trial sanctioned by the old laws. The hostages watched with desperate hope. Corvath strained against the wolves holding him, his roars shaking the ancient stones. Valoria was faster, stronger, better trained, but Veratus had something the Luna lacked. Something worth dying for. She fought with the fury of a mother defending her children. Every snap of her jaws, every rake of her claws, carried the force of 5 months of fear and anguish. She thought of the whip tearing across her back, thought of the cold courtyard stones beneath her bound hands, thought of every night she had spent running, hiding, protecting the lives that grew within her from a world that wanted them dead. And she thought of Corvath, of amber eyes that had seen her true self, of gentle hands that had torn away her chains, of a king who had destroyed himself searching for an Omega who had believed herself unworthy of love. She was worthy. She had always been worthy. And she would not let this serpent take her family from her. Veratus caught Vyloria's foreleg in her jaws and wrenched with all her strength. Bone snapped. The Luna howled in pain, stumbling, her damaged limb giving way beneath her weight. But Valoria was not finished. She twisted mid-fall, shifting back to human form as she moved. Her uninjured hand closed around the poisoned blade she had dropped, and she thrust it toward Veratus's exposed belly with killing force. Time seemed to freeze. Veratus saw the blade coming, saw the dark shimmer of wolfsbane on its edge, saw her children's death written in the arc of poisoned steel. The golden light within her exploded. It erupted from every part of her being, a radiance so brilliant that wolves throughout the hall shielded their eyes. The power of the Selenthyr bloodline, dormant for 3 centuries, had found its champion, and it would not let her fall. The blade struck the cocoon of golden energy wrapped around her belly and shattered. Fragments of poisoned steel scattered across the marble floor. Valoria screamed as the backlash of broken magic tore through her arm, searing flesh from bone. Veratus shifted back to human form, the transformation flowing through her with perfect grace. She stood over her fallen enemy, naked and glowing and terrible in her power. "Yield," she commanded, and her voice carried harmonics that resonated with ancient authority. Valoria looked up at her with hatred that transcended sanity. "Never." The Luna's ruined hand scrabbled for another weapon. "I am the queen. I am the rightful mate. I will never yield to an Omega whore." Her fingers closed around a shard of her broken blade. She thrust it toward Veratus's heart. Veratus caught her wrist. The golden light flowed from her hand into Valoria's flesh. But this was not healing power. This was judgment. This was the magic of the Selenthyr bloodline passing sentence on one who had violated every sacred law of their kind. Valoria screamed as golden fire raced through her veins. Her wolf, the beast that had made her strong, that had given her the power to terrorize and torture and scheme, was being burned away from within. When the light faded, the former Luna lay motionless on the marble floor. She was alive, but her eyes held nothing. No wolf, no power, no connection to the bonds that tied their kind together. She had become the one thing she had always despised: human. "The trial is concluded," Veratus announced to the stunned hall. "House Sylvain's claim to the throne is forfeit. The hostages will be released. The traitors will face justice according to law." Lord Sylvain surged forward, drawing his own blade. "You cannot—" He never finished the sentence. A black blur crossed the hall, and suddenly Corvath stood before him, one hand wrapped around the Lord's throat. "My mate has rendered judgment," the Alpha King said softly. "Would you like to challenge her decision?" Lord Sylvain's sword clattered to the floor. One by one, the Sylvain soldiers followed suit. They dropped their weapons. They dropped to their knees. They bowed their heads before the Omega who had defeated their Luna and claimed the crown by right of blood and bond and battle. Corvath released Lord Sylvain to his guards and crossed the hall to where Veratus stood. Someone had produced a cloak, and he wrapped it around her shoulders with trembling hands. "My queen," he whispered, his eyes bright with tears. "My magnificent, extraordinary queen." Veratis swayed on her feet. The power was fading now, leaving exhaustion in its wake. But before the darkness could claim her, she had one more thing to do. She reached up and pulled Corvath's head down to her level. She pressed her lips to the place where his neck met his shoulder, and she bit. The bond completed with a force that shook the very foundations of the castle. Every wolf in the hall felt it, a resonance that proclaimed to all the realm that the Alpha King and his true mate were finally, completely, eternally one. Along the connection that now blazed between them, Veratis felt Corvath's soul merge with her own. She saw herself through his eyes, radiant and powerful and beloved beyond measure. She felt his joy, his relief, his overwhelming love, and she shared everything she had with him in return. When they finally broke apart, both weeping, the hall had erupted into howls of celebration. The war was over. The true queen had claimed her throne. And somewhere in the chaos of victory, Veratis felt her children kick with joy. The weeks that followed were a blur of justice and rebuilding. Lord Sylvain was executed for treason, his final moments spent begging for the mercy he had never shown others. The soldiers who had participated in the coup were given a choice: exile or service. Most chose service, their loyalty now bound to a queen who had proven herself worthy of the crown in the most ancient way possible. And Valoria, stripped of her wolf and her power, was banished to the frozen northern wastes. She would live out her days as the nothing she had once accused Veratis of being, a fitting punishment for a woman who had measured worth by blood and rank alone. The kingdom healed slowly but surely. The crops that had withered during Corvath's months of anguished searching began to flourish once more. The wolves who had grown restless and aggressive, driven to distraction by their king's broken bond, settled into peace as the completed mate connection radiated stability throughout the realm. The people of Volantis welcomed their new queen with a fervor that still surprised Veratis. She had expected suspicion, had braced herself for whispered accusations of witchcraft and seduction. Instead, she found acceptance. The wolves could feel the truth of the bond between her and Corvath. They could sense the ancient power that flowed through her veins. And when the historians finally traced her lineage, the acceptance transformed into reverence. She was the last daughter of House Selenthir, the great-granddaughter of a princess who had been hidden away during a bloody purge, secreted to the castle gates as an infant with nothing to mark her heritage but the birthmark on her hip. The bloodline that had founded Volantis had returned to claim its throne. On a warm evening in late spring, as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Veratis brought 2 new lives into the world. The labor was long and difficult, but she faced it with the same courage she had shown in the Great Hall. Corvath remained at her side throughout, holding her hand, wiping her brow, telling her he loved her with every breath. When it was over, 2 perfect children lay in their parents' arms, a boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's gift for light. When he opened his eyes, they glowed with soft golden warmth. A girl with silver-white hair that matched her mother's wolf form. Her eyes held the amber fire of the ancient bloodline, fierce and beautiful even in infancy. Corvath wept as he held his daughter, his massive warrior's hands cradling her with exquisite gentleness. "Thank you," he whispered to Veratis, "for surviving, for fighting, for giving me everything I never knew I needed." Veratis smiled through her own tears, their son nestled against her chest. "You gave me the same, a home, a purpose, a love that refused to let me go, even when I tried to run from it." She reached up to touch the claiming mark on his throat, the silver scar that proclaimed him hers to all who saw it. His fingers found the matching mark on her hip, tracing the Selenthir crest that had finally revealed its truth. "We found each other against every obstacle," Corvath said softly. "Through betrayal and exile and war. Through 5 months of separation and a battle that should have been beyond all hope. Because we were always meant to, Veratus replied. The bond knew before we did. It held us together when everything else tried to tear us apart. Outside their window, wolves began to lift their voices in song, a celebration of new life, a proclamation of joy, a promise that the royal line would continue strong and true. Corvath leaned down to press a kiss to her forehead. My queen, he murmured, my heart, my home. My king, she answered, my soul, my everything. The children stirred between them, small hands reaching for each other, already bonded in the way of twins who had shared their mother's womb through danger and triumph alike. And in the great tapestry of the kingdom's history, a new chapter was woven. The story of an Omega who had risen from the ashes of brutality to claim a throne, of an Alpha King who had torn apart his realm to find his true love, of a bond that could not be broken by poison or politics or even the cruelest designs of fate. They had found each other when the world insisted they never should. They had fought for each other when surrender would have been easier, and they had won. As the last light of sunset faded into the gentle embrace of stars, Veratus closed her eyes and listened to the harmony of her family's heartbeats. Her mate, her children, her wolves, singing beneath the moon. She had spent 19 years believing she was nobody. Now she knew the truth. She had always been exactly where she was meant to be. And she was finally, completely, eternally home. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.